In 1983, the TV schedule for Thanksgiving was generally reserved for uplifting viewing, such as football and Charlie Brown movies. However, in that year, people prepared for Turkey Day by watching a frightening glimpse of what might be their near future. The result, on November 20th, 1983, was the most watched made-for-TV movie ever. We're going to dive into that movie and a whole lot more next. Hi everyone, welcome to RetroFlix. This is your channel for movie and TV retrospectives. Today we have just a tremendous movie that came at a time when our country was really scared, anxious, on the edge of their seat, you know, of what's happening in this world. It was a really scary time. And what was going on was the Cold War. Now, the Cold War was a geopolitical struggle between the United States and Soviet Union. And of course, they had their other countries that were backing them, but we were the superpowers and we were at the forefront of this. Now, what ended up happening, this was started at the end of World War II and went up to 1991, so you had your peaks and valleys of when things were kind of calm and things were escalated. In the early 80s, we definitely were escalated to where we were back to worrying about what's going to happen to this world, the United States and Soviet Union. You know, because one of the things, it was geopolitical, but it was also going to become physical, because there was part of it was an arms race. And what was the strongest arm to have? And that was nuclear weapons. And so what we had then was a struggle. It was always a competition there, but a struggle of who was going to get it first. And then when they both have it, you know, is somebody going to push that button? You know, so in the early 80s, we definitely were escalated to having that worry, because tensions were real high between the two countries of nuclear war. And I'll talk about this later, but I was just about a teenager at the time, and I remember this vividly of what was going on in this country, you know, at the time. And so what people especially at this point, well, in this situation, a television network did was they wanted to look at this and say, you know what, this might be something we can turn into a movie. You know, if nuclear war did happen, what would it be like afterwards? And that was really the impetus to this movie. Now, in this channel, we have been really looking at movies that have went right into the theater, that were made for theaters by big movie studios, right? Well, this one is different. This one is the first one we're talking about in this channel that was made just for television. And so this was an ABC production. Now, made for television movies typically have been looked at as more like, have you ever heard the term of a B movie, which is a movie that was like real low production, didn't cost a lot of money, wasn't a major production at all, like, you know, like a studio in Hollywood would finance. Usually they were more independent type. Well, made for TV movies had really that kind of was really looked at that type of reputation. They wouldn't have a lot of money. They would use actors that weren't that well known. And this one actually had a lot of actors in it that would become well known for the next year, and we'll talk about them here in a little bit. But yeah, this was a made for TV movie by ABC, and ABC took this on. And the movie that we're talking about here is the movie called The Day After. And as I mentioned in the intro, this was 1983, so they were looking to, they wanted to release it actually earlier, and we'll talk about that later, but it ended up being November 20th, 1983 when this was released. So let's go into this. What's a synopsis of this movie? Well, basically this film depicts a fictional war, you know, between NATO, which is the North American Treaty Organization, which would basically be where the United States would be on that side, and the Warsaw Pact, which would be the Soviet Union side, and other nations, socialist nations that would be on their side. So And what ends up happening is then this rapidly escalates into a full-out nuclear war. So this is where we start out, with like I said, a geopolitical type of a war. Then it goes to a physical, all-out nuclear war. And this nuclear war, of course, would be between the United States and Soviet Union, since we are the two powers on those sides, power on each side. And it focuses on this nuclear war strike happening in Middle America, and more specifically Lawrence, Kansas. They actually do depict Kansas City, Missouri in that area there, but a lot of it's actually in Lawrence, Kansas, which is just not too far outside Kansas City, and their proximity also to American missile silos. And so that's a basic synopsis of this movie. Now you have to understand the real objective here for this movie was, yes, they are going to show obviously, a lot of this movie leading up to nuclear war, but the real objective of this movie was after the nuclear war would happen. What would life be like after that? And that's what people really were what would that be like if this happens? And so that's the real unknown. You don't feel like you have any control on who's pushing the button, but once the button's pushed and you can't do anything about it, okay, then what's going to happen after that? After that happens, what's going to happen to us? What's life going to be like if you live? So that was really the real objective of this movie. So let's look at the cast of this movie. Now, I'm only going to mention a few. There is a bunch of this movie has a lot of people in it. So the cast, the characters that are in this movie, in this plot, there is a ton of them. So I'm not going through every one of them. I'm just going to mention a few that not only had big roles in this, but you may have heard of, and then we'll go on to have success after this movie. And a few of them had started to have a little success before this. And the first one I want to mention is Jason Robards, who really was a lead in this movie. Now he had the most success. He was a veteran actor at this point, very veteran. In fact, I think he may have even been in his 60s. He may have been in his 60s at this point of the movie. In 1983, this movie was shot. And he would do a movie, for instance, one I love that was actually around this time was Max Dugan Returns, which was Matthew Broderick's first ever movie he did. But he definitely was probably the get actor of this, for this movie, because he had been around for such a long time. And a lot of people, that generation, the older generation, knew who he was. Jobeth Williams, who just a year prior was in the hit Poltergeist. She played the mother and the wife. To the mother to the kids, of course, and the wife to Craig T. Nelson, who played the father in that movie. And then another interesting person that was in it was Steve Guttenberg. Now, Steve Guttenberg wasn't really known at this point, and the next year he really hit big time and became known, particularly throughout the 80s and early 90s, because the next year day after he got the role of Mahoney on the Police Academy movies. So if you ever watched that, Steve Guttenberg, who was Mahoney, was in this as well. Another became a really successful actor. He actually had a little success even before this movie, was John Lithgow. John Lithgow would go on to do the movie Footloose, which was a huge movie. And then, of course, in the 90s and early 2000s, he was in a hit sitcom, Third Rock from the Sun. But just actually before this movie, he was nominated for a Best Actor for the movie The World According to Garp with Robin Williams. So, he came in, he still was kind of, but, with that, obviously, he had some, he had a name even coming into this, but he still was, making his way up and he obviously would become a very prominent actor in Hollywood later down the line. One other person that was in this that actually kind of had a cameo of a guy in a hospital was Wayne Knight, who was best known as Newman in Seinfeld. So that's kind of just an interesting bit of trivia in this. But there was a lot more. There was a lot more I could go on. It's interesting too that when you look at the broadcast of this movie, obviously this movie was very controversial, and so there were things that the director, who was Nicholas Meyer, who would direct this one in ABC, did not. I guess Meyer probably wanted it a little bit more real than ABC wanted it, because there was this controversy with the movie and how traumatic this movie may be. So let's dive further into the broadcast, what I think is really interesting. Again, the day after was initially scheduled to premiere on ABC in May of '83, but because of all these changes after shooting that they needed to make, they pushed the date to November 20th, 1983, which we had talked about before. There were several scenes that were cut. Because ABC, well, actually, I think the psychiatrist came to ABC. I don't think it was the other way around. Psychiatrist came to ABC, or somehow they got to talking, psychiatrist and ABC, and psychiatrist said these scenes are going to be traumatic. So obviously, these psychiatrists saw the scenes somehow before it came out, but they said these are going to be traumatic for children. We do not think you should put this in the movie. And so they ended up cutting it out. The director really, I think, was hesitant because he really wanted to depict this as what he believed was going to happen, and what, and now of course it was research too with scientists and all this. It wasn't just the director or anybody else just thinking this is, they also consulted people that might have an expert view on, the after effects of nuclear war. But, Meyer lost that and had to cut several scenes out of it. But Meyer, the director, did persuade ABC to put a disclaimer at the end of the movie. And this disclaimer basically would say that this movie downplays the effect that nuclear war would have. In other words, if this happens, if a nuclear war happens and bombs are dropped, that what we're showing you here is going to be nothing compared to what it's really going to be. And so that was put at the end of the movie. Promotion of this started about 7 months prior to the movie, so they put a lot of promotion into this movie. And they also sent out, and I say they, I'm talking about ABC, sent out what they called viewer guides, and about 500,000 of those, and it talked about nuclear war and discussions people can have about this topic, several months prior to when they were going to air the movie. So what was the reception of this movie once it was aired? Again, November 20th, 1983, it was aired. John Callum, and I didn't mention him, but he is one of the actors in this movie too. He actually was tasked with making a statement before the movie, and before the movie premiered, he gave a disclaimer that this was going to contain graphic and disturbing scenes, and that parents should have, if children are watching this, parents should watch this with their children and discuss it afterwards. ABC also had a 1-800 hotline with counselors available. Again, they knew, the impact this could have, and leading up to this movie, the controversy, there are people that didn't think this was a good idea to have this movie. So they tried to do everything they possibly could. So we want to show this movie, but what can we do to try to soften this for people and make it a learning experience, educational, as opposed to having everybody running down the street. This is scared. So they tried to put some things in place. Another thing that they did too is after the movie, they had discussion that was led by Ted Koppel, who was known for Nightline back at the time. If you grew up back then, you probably know Ted Koppel. And the show was called Viewpoint, and he had several people on there. One of which was the scientist Carl Sagan, to talk about this issue of the arms race, because again, we talked earlier about it being a geopolitical issue. Well, it was going to turn into a physical war. with this arms race and who is going to get to the ultimate weapon of nuclear war first, and once they got it, who was actually going to use it. Again, there were a lot of critics to this movie, but when it was all said and done, 38.5 million households, or 100 million people watched The Day After that evening on November 20th, 1983. That is still today the most watched made-for-TV movie ever. So, even though there were critics and people will think this may not be a good idea, or like that, a lot of people watched it, and those were children as well too. I remember seeing, I can talk about right now real quickly myself now that I bring this up. I did too. Like I said, I was almost a teenager at the time. I was in the thick of this. I knew what was going on. I was scared too. I was old enough to know about the nuclear war and so forth like that. I was talked about in school. My parents never really talked about it, but we watched this movie together. And it's something that always stuck with me, what was going on in that country at the time, and being that age at that time, and being scared, and if this happens, what's going to do? Where do I go? Obviously, people were building bomb shelters. People were doing that back in the 50s. The beginning of the Cold War. I guess that was nothing really new, but I do know some people that started to do that didn't have them, that started doing in the early 80s when we had a really huge escalation between the tensions. And so this was something here that that I experienced in my life, and I remember it. But again, regardless of people that probably didn't think this was good, I don't know, this might not be a good idea, a lot of them watched it and probably were, maybe thankful that they did, maybe not. Maybe there's some that wish I didn't, I didn't know that happened. But anyway, this resonated even to Washington, D.C. when the president, and at that time it was President Ronald Reagan. Reagan reportedly watched this movie and was very depressed after it, and he also reportedly said after the movie, and I quote, "This will not happen on my watch." So it had a major effect on him. If, again, I say reportedly, if that is indeed what he said, which I could certainly see that, and that was good that I'm going to make sure this does not happen in this country. And I wanted to also point out this movie was aired in the Soviet Union and other countries. Not only Democrat countries that were on the side of the United States, but also too communist socialist type of countries too that were over on that side. This was aired everywhere. We still don't know. Somehow there was a thought that the Soviet Union actually aired it before we did, but I'm not sure about that. The Day After received 12 Emmy nominations, which were our television nominations, kind of like the Academy Awards, the Oscars, or our movies, Hollywood movies. This being a movie, but it'll be on TV, it was an Emmy. So TV shows get Emmy Awards. And so out of the 12 nominations, they won 2 for The Day After. And and I just realized too, and I wasn't around back at the end of last year there to do it, when I was away, but November 20th of 2023, just last November, would have been the 40th anniversary of the showing of The Day After. So now I wish I was around here and would have realized that and did this episode then. It would have been great to do it on the 40th anniversary. But hey, this is better than nothing. So, all right. So normally you watch these videos. I ask, or I tell you where you can see these movies that I'm doing, where you can stream them. This one here, though, I cannot. The only place I could find that you might be able to get is on YouTube. And other than that, I can't find it anywhere. But I thought it was such an important movie to bring up in this. When we look at made-for-television movies and impacts they have and things that are going on in our country historically, and when you look at retrospectives, I had to do this movie. But this movie is a very difficult one to find. It looks like to me anywhere streaming. So again, check YouTube. see if it's on there. I've checked Hulu. I didn't see it on Hulu. I don't have Netflix. Usually I do a search on Roku to see where across streaming places where you can get it, and I didn't see it anywhere on there. So if you find it somewhere, please comment below and let me know. I'd love to know. But yeah, maybe it'll come in the future sometime. So if you don't find, I certainly will too. I will keep looking to see if it comes on in the future sometime somewhere to see it. But again, I just thought it was really important to do as an episode here. So again, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And thank you again for being here. And until next time, that's a wrap.